Ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to welcome you to the fourth panel of our conference. Anja Bandau and I, we are very excited to present you very diverse perspectives on visual representations of violence. We are happy to welcome Gabriela Zamorano and virtually from Lima, Maria Eugenia Ulfe, who accompanies us. For Maria Eugenia, it's very early in the morning, so thank you so much for joining us at 7 o'clock in the morning, Maria Eugenia, for your first coffee of the day. As well as after our coffee break, the panel consists of Alicia Decker and Freddy Zimba. Welcome to you too. The comment of Gisela Canepa-Koch, she's not able to give her command. Gisela is ill today, and so we have to do this this panel without a comment in the second half after the coffee break. So we will begin with the presentations of Gabriela and Maria Eugenia before entering a first round of questions and discussions. And after the coffee break, we will hear from Alicia and Freddy and then have more time for another round of questions and discussions. Please let me start with the introduction of the first speaker, Gabriela Zamorano. She's a professor at the Centro de Estudios Antropológicos at the Colegio de Michoacán in Mexico. Moreover, since this year, she's a member of the Mexican Sistema Nacional de Investigadores of the Consejo Nacional de Ciencia y Tecnología. In the past, she has been a visiting professor for visual anthropology at the Facultad Latinoamericana en Ciencias Sociales, FLACSO, and in Quito, in Ecuador. And in 2008-2009, she had a postdoc fellowship at the research department of the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris. Gabriela received her PhD in cultural anthropology from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, with a thesis supervised, among others, by Deborah Poole, kind of dean or grande dame of Latin American visual studies. With Deborah Poole, Gabriela co-edited the book De Frente al Perfil, Retratos Fotográficos de Frederick Starr, published in 2012. 2017 saw the publishing of Gabriela's book Indigenous Media and Political Imaginaries in the Contemporary Bolivia with University of Nebraska Press. The book received the Fray Bernardino de Sahagún INAH Award a year later. And last year, with Alex Vailati, she co-edited the book Ethnographies of On-Demand Films, Anthropological Explorations of Commissioned Audiovisual Productions, published with Palgrave Macmillan. But for me, as a historian who is used to publish his research in a written form, most striking is that her list of publications does not only include further chapters and articles, like the piece we read with our students in preparation of the conference, An Expected Revolution, Visuality, Autodefensas, and Imaginaries of Citizen Self-Protection in Mexico, published in Anthrovision in 2018. No, most striking to me is Gabriela's publication list also has a film on it. In 2020, she directed Archivo Cordero, a documentary on the photographic archive of Julio Cordero, in La Paz, in Bolivia. She directed several other shorter films and curated a couple of photographic exhibitions in La Paz, several Mexican cities, and in New York as well. Thus, I cannot imagine a better speaker to start our panel on the visual representations of violence than Gabriela with her presentation on videos of mob violence from the so-called Mexican drug war. We are happy to have you here, Gabriela, and we look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Hinnerk, for such a nice presentation, an exciting presentation. And thank you especially for bringing me here. I thank the Leibniz University, the Volkswagen Foundation, Hinerk, Anja, and all the organizing team that is making this spectacular event very welcoming and very warm. Well, actually, I changed a little bit the name of my presentation. It's called Elusive Faces, Public Visual Displays and Erasures of Criminal Subjects in Contemporary Michoacán. A couple of months ago, a news circulated about Zamora being the most dangerous city in the world. This estimation was based in the number of murders per day in relation to population rate. I have lived in Zamora, Michoacán for over 12 years. During this time, I have tried to deal with the atmosphere of daily violence that, fortunately, has not touched me directly, but that, as time goes by, is more and more palpable in the routinely and increasingly reduced spaces that me, my family, and friends inhabit and go through. An atmosphere of violence is palpable in visual, sound, and other sensorial markers that indicate that something happened. The recurrent scene of crime is recognizable by a corner of a house, or a house surrounded by the already familiar yellow police tape. Prosecution's office white and black bands, police and ambulance tilting lights, and people watching with fear and curiosity from afar. Sound markers include deaf detonations that we learn to distinguish between firecrackers and gunshots. Visual markers of daily violence appear with sudden rushed movements of patrols and an army, specialized police checkpoints in regular city routes, and the creation of more and more modest altars in streets, businesses, and plazas. An atmosphere of violence is palpable in unending stories and rumors that everybody tells about, that everybody is afraid of, and that randomly insist before falling asleep or that keep you awake in the middle of the night. The atmosphere of violence also inhabits virtual and intimate spaces. Rumors and news spread by WhatsApp of surveillance camera records documenting house and car assaults. Facebook and WhatsApp posts circulating the desolating announcement of a new disappearance, someone who is a relative of someone you know. This atmosphere is also palpable in our children's attentive silences while we, adults, initiate the unavoidable moment at dinners or meetings in which one of us starts out lowering our voices, saying how things are becoming worse, to then initiate the list of details on this week's new violent events. Under this atmosphere, we inhabitants learn to look, hear, move, talk, and relate to each other in whole different ways. Among all these traces, indexes, and new ways of embodying this atmosphere, there is the insisting question of who are they? On the one hand, the efficiency of criminal activity in Zamora is based on the ghostly, anonymous, and overarching presence of the organized crime. At the same time, most rumors coincide in identifications of criminal public actors who own local businesses, participate in political life, or even manage public and private educational institutions. People know who they are, but also people don't know who they are. Considering this wide range between the anonymity and identifiability of narco-related criminals, in this paper I reflect on the different faces that local publics associate to criminal activity, and on how these resonate with media and police efforts to represent or identify such subjects despite their sleeping, ungraspable character. For this purpose, I track different instances in which photographs or other forms of visual representations speculate around or display faces of narco-related actors in Michoacán. In doing so, I reflect on the regimes of visibility and invisibility that often define who, when, and how criminals can show and even boast their faces and identities, and who or when they cannot do so. I argue that these processes of image production and circulation of the criminal face are also forms of disputing necropolitics, namely processes of affirming or denying the value and humanity of specific individuals through their public appearance. Unseen faces, they are everywhere. Above and within the atmosphere of violence, the figure of la maña, or el narco, that mostly produces it, takes numerous forms. "I saw them," exclaimed on the phone with amazement, and even with some pride, a friend who, while eating in a popular restaurant in a nearby town, saw a big group of bejeweled men who, after parking their expensive trucks, took a table while putting their golden arms on the side. This happened 10 years ago, when such public displays were more common. This encounter seems to match Netflix Mexican and American series and movies' narco characters. At the same time, in Zamora, most accounts of ordinary criminal activity coincide with identifying young men under 25 who often commit robberies or shootings while driving motorcycles. As expected, these young hired killers take part in wide, extremely marginal sectors that function as sources of disposable population for poor neighborhoods of Zamora and nearby locations. As it comes out, subjects involved in narco-related criminal activity are diverse and numerous, all of them necessary for an extensive, efficient, and hierarchized network. Who are they? Practices of highlighting or obscuring faces might be related, on the one hand, to the ways in which official documents, like police mugshots or identity shots, have normalized the idea that the face is the main marker of individual identity. This normalization might relate to the indexical quality of resemblance that Barth finds in photography, namely, and I quote, "the subject's identity, an absurd, purely legal, even penal affair. Likeness gives out identity as itself." End of quote. Since the origins of photography, science has attempted to use this technology as a net to make visible the invisible, to show what is not reachable to the normal sight, and in many ways, to reveal the hidden. Based on similar principles, criminal or police mugshots are also about publicly revealing, from the act of capture, the hidden identity of subjects who, in anonymity, have arguably acted against the law. In doing so, the act of capture is not only performed as an act of justice, but also as an act of disclosure and public display, which often works as a trophy, like when the Caballeros Templarios leader La Tuta was finally captured in 2015, or like the capture of long-searched capo Rafael Caro Quintero a few days ago. During the last decade, mass media in Mexico have normalized the spectacular exposure of police mugshots of cartel members that provoke public speculation over their fashionable clothing, like the capture of La Barbie, who was kind of challenging the racial and class profile of cartel members, or fake identity, like this one of El Chapo Guzman, who, when both pictures were presented to the public, apparently the second one was a fake person, no? So it was a mugshot of a fake person playing El Chapo Guzman. At the same time, entertainment, commercial media have popularized, while becoming highly benefited from, the appearance of mysterious, all-powerful, cold-blooded characters and of real and fictitious Mexican narco capos. Contemporary narco series and films, mostly from ranchero, dark-skinned, virile, and handsome chiefs, whose stylish images often mismatch the rawness and vulgar realism of mugshots. In this respect, memes and T-shirt play, for instance, with the image of the dandy-looking Caro Quintero, characterized by handsome Mexican actor Tenoch Huerta in the Netflix series Narcos Mexico, next to a close-up of this chip at the moment of his capture. The juxtaposition of these images is completed by the comment, "The Caro Quintero I wanted, the one they are handing me over." This playful popularized forms of public interpretation and intervention on the portraits of untouchable public figures constitute active forms of speculating and grounding common imaginaries that seem to detach these figures from localized daily violences through heroic, sublimizing narratives about these chiefs, for instance, as counter-hegemonic subjects that flaunt and mock the state and the law. Mediatized images of narco chiefs are placed away from daily, lower-status criminal actors whose faces become purposefully elusive or erased. Faces you don't look at. When acquaintances describe how their car was stolen in Zamora, they coincide in describing young men under 20 years approaching in a motorcycle and then pointing at them with a gun. Likewise, news about killings in the city use the recurrent phrasing. I quote, "Two men shot the victim and then escaped on a motorcycle," end of quote. Most of the time, attackers are identified again as young men under 20 who managed to run away without being captured. Many other times, it is their turn to become killed, either because of doing things wrong in their jobs or for taking part of the opposing side. They are young people, mostly men, but also women from very marginal sectors of the city and nearby locations. Hired killers, sicarios, watchers, halcones, and daily thieves who become hired by somebody else whose face we almost never get to see. They are children, nephews, brothers, and grandchildren of someone who knows they already took a wrong way or who is en malos pasos. Most of the time, their particular lives, captures, or deaths go unnoticed unless they take part in a bigger crime. In such cases, their existence and identity might become public through searched notices or in local news or through Facebook posts. And here I would like to just show you this post of a captured sicario that was posted in a Facebook site administered by Autodefensa or Gendarmerie forces in Michoacán. And talking about lynching, here you see a kind of visual lynching. No? His face is really exposed with a close-up, kind of subjugated, and then all these comments are by users, by public users, Facebook users are just like indicating, burn him alive, kill him, he doesn't deserve to live. No? Unlike the big capos whose identities and appearances become sources of speculation, fantasy, jokes, and desire, those involved in daily killings, thefts, and other crimes related to cartel activity become disposable and replaceable. And their deaths, when it is the case, are often justified as necessary or unavoidable, not only by criminal structures, but also by police and wider publics. Estaban metidos. They were involved in that, people justify. In a few cases, identities of criminal subjects become more significant, although not so much in individual terms, but as for what their identities represent. Such was the case of the 12 minors, boys and girls aged between 11 and 13 years, whose portraits occupied the front pages of local media after being captured for taking part of the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación cells in Zamora during a confrontation with the police on January 30th, 2022. In the news, their image appears blurred or with eyes covered. Portrayed in headshots, each of them looks up front the camera with a harsh gesture. In contrast to the indifference or even repulsion against most criminal mugshots, the circulation of this image causes shock, concern, and discomfort. It also provokes the vague promise of the Mexican president, and I quote, to keep working against family disintegration and for options for the youth, end of quote. The public circulation of these portraits of criminal subjects from Michoacán involves and sparks various forms of claims, promises, and threats. Among state authorities, portraits of criminal subjects constitute a trophy, a claim of legitimacy. We are doing our work against impunity, a promise to work harder. In contrast, among the general public, these images constitute continuous suspicion, hopelessness, and reiteration of distrust. Like with the saturated sites that announce people who have disappeared, the fact that the portraits and characteristics of criminals that appear in searched lists does not at all mean they will be found or even looked after. These announcements show two different groups of faces, two overwhelming sides of violence in Mexico that seem to have the same disposable value for economic and justice systems. Alternatively, within the large number of local inhabitants who are able to identify small and big-sized criminals among their neighbors or family members, there is just a fearful silence. Rumors just confirm what everybody knows. Big chiefs own the growing amount of new businesses that bring prosperity to the city. People know who owns local plazas. People know who lives next door. But in practical terms, those are faces you don't dare to look at or even point at. Visual displays. Images of criminal actors do not exclusively circulate in the interest of police. Criminals themselves develop effective strategies of visibility to display their public presence. For instance, on the early morning of May 28, 2019, a convoy of numerous brand new trucks and cars labeled with the initials of Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación went across the city of Zamora while armed men undertook non-stop machine gun shooting in the streets they passed by. Oh, we don't see them. Okay. Before and during the attack, cartel members video recorded and photographed the convoy, the market vehicles with their initials, and some of the armed men who took part in it. They were laughing and shooting at the whole line of vehicles. These images were circulated right after the attack in social media such as WhatsApp and Facebook, and then reproduced in mainstream national press. In this undeniable display of their domain over Zamora, members of the cartel made their authorship clear through labels on cars, but also through corporeal markers such as the hats that also marked with the cartel initials. As we see in the image, individual faces appear, but they are covered. But this is not a limitation to display this man's identity in terms of affiliation to this particular criminal group. As many other media strategies based on terror to claim territories and to evidence the limitations of state security, such as narcomantas, the display of bodies or body parts in public places, and self-produced videos in collaboration with mainstream media by cartel capos like La Tuta, this convoy constituted one more successful strategy of publicity. In Zamora, all of us received the message either in our phones or through rumors. All inhabitants, adults and children, discussed the event with amazement. The city was empty during the following days. Through the events like this one and its effective replication, the atmosphere of violence is also palpable. In less strategic ways, cartel members also document and share through photographic images their daily lives. Sometimes these intimate images serve for means different than they were intended for. In 2014, the Autodefensa citizen Facebook site Valor por Michoacán published a series of, I quote, images extracted from cell phones of organized crime members. The text next to it is an explicit invitation from the Autodefensas to the public to help identify and especially locate people who appear in those portraits. The images are portraits of men, most of them solemnly showing off arms and trucks, some of them with sky masks or army uniforms. Here again, there is a display of faces of people who, although their fundamental form of operation is anonymity, seem to maintain an urgency for exhibiting themselves and their power, at least among their close circles. Although these seem to be ordinary portraits, they are at the same time illegal due to the identity of people who appear and to the arms they hold. Despite their illegal character, these men trust intimacy and dare to photograph their faces. Therefore, by leaking them from the personal space, almost like the intimate photographic album that now represents a cell phone, to the public space of denunciation, these portraits cease being an ordinary game of poses to become criminal evidence. photographic technologies allow for this oscillation between the space of personal fantasy and the indexical datum. There are a few comments to this series, but in them, users reiterate their lack of credibility in state justice and complain about the links that the images suggest between the organized crime and the Mexican army by evidencing the use of army uniforms and arms. Thus, aside from working as searched images for criminal and autodefensa investigation, for the public, these kinds of portraits are also evidence of impunity. Like in the series of leaked images just discussed, another series published in a Facebook profile apparently sponsored by another cartel, Los Caballeros Templarios, also points at the apparent need that organized crime members feel to make themselves visible despite their anonymity. In this case, masked or pixelated faces become a useful strategy to erase the face as the main marker of identity while leaving bodies, arms, backgrounds, and even written inscriptions clear. Another genre of self-representation is circulating photos or videos of the objects and contexts that surround the individual, but without showing his body. No? Sorry, I will stop here for a second. This means that the materiality of what surrounds, like the material objects that surround these individuals, are kind of embodying also their identity, even though they cannot show their faces. No? Finally, I would like to make reference to a different series of portraits presented by a Facebook profile sponsored by the Caballeros Templarios cartel, which identifies itself as a site of news and media. The site administrator's comments indicate that people who appear in these portraits died, most of them on the line or in combat. Some are portraits of men enjoying ordinary activities in a bar, restaurant, or house. Others show men posing with arms similar to the ones described in the section of cell phone leaked phones. 4 out of the 6 portraits display faces. The user's comments to these portraits accompanied the tribute through blessing and cheering phrases. In an uncanny way, the obituary portraits of argued organized crime members seem to reclaim their humanity. Not needing to hide anymore, through death, their faces can be publicly restored. In doing so, their faces vindicate the air, animula, little individual soul that Barthes refers to, stripped to them by the vulgarity of the downed anonymity of mass-mediated criminal corpses. I mean, we usually see in the media the bodies of sicarios and people or criminals, like narco-related criminals, just lying on the ground without a face. Unlike obituary portraits, these images of corpses are normalized by a sort of Mexican necropolitics, namely by discourses that are currently common in legal justice and mass media in Mexico, such as the idea that people added to the long list of killed and disappeared were somehow involved with organized crime, and that therefore their lives had no value anyway. This commonsensical idea is reflected in many of the comments that react to news and images circulated in digital media, like some users' responses to a controversy over the extraofficial execution of 43 argued hired killers in Ecuandureo, Michoacán in April 2015. And I quote, "I don't know why people make such a big deal about the death of some persons who, as it was already dead, were criminals." Or, "the best criminal is the dead one." End of quote. The circulation of portraits like the ones just discussed, as well as the public reactions they raise, constitute non-official sites to anonymously express notions of justice toward those who are arguably do or do not deserve to die. The air that I perceive in the obituary portraits suggests that disputes over legality and legitimacy also involve competing over the value or humanity of specific lives. Therefore, the display or erasure of faces in the analyzed portraits and their illegal but effective circulation in digital media might constitute one more terrain in which criminality, justice, and value of specific lives are actively being disputed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation, Gabriela. And it's better for my back, thank you. Now I'm happy to welcome Maria Eugenia virtually from Lima here in our panel. Maria Eugenia is a Peruvian anthropologist, full professor and researcher at the Department of Social Sciences at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. There, she directs the interdisciplinary research group Memory and Democracy. Maria Eugenia holds a PhD in Human Sciences Anthropology at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. since 2005, and an MA in the Arts of the Americas, Oceania, and Africa at the University of East Anglia. She is honorary visiting professor at the Universidad Nacional de San Cristóbal de Huamanga in Ayacucho, Peru, and honorary professor in the School of Arts, Media, and American Studies at the University of East Anglia. Moreover, Maria Eugenia has been the director of the Latin American Studies Association Film Festival in 2020 and 2021, and the director of the Master Program in Anthropology and in Visual Anthropology at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú from 2014 to 2020. Her research interests include the anthropology of the state, politics, and arts, with a special focus on memory studies, gender, ethnicity, and violence, and experimental visual ethnography. With her colleague Jimena Malaga Sabogal, she recently published the book Reparando Mundos, Víctimas y Estado en los Andes Peruanos, published with her university in 2021, which received an honorary mention by the Peru section of the LASA Book Prize Flora Tristan this year. Her list of publications is too long to present it here in full, but let me mention that in preparation for the conference, together with our students, Maria Eugenia, we read the piece Counter-Narratives, Visual Anthropology and Memory Activism in Peru that you published together with Marta Cecilia Dietrich in Anthrovision in 2018. Moreover, Maria Eugenia wrote several other books in English, like Resource Booms and Institutional Pathways, the Case of the Extractive Industry, published with Palgrave Macmillan in 2017, and in Spanish, like Y después de la violencia que queda, Víctimas, Ciudadanos y Reparaciones en el contexto post-CBR en el Perú, published with Claxo in Buenos Aires in 2013. We are happy to have you, a proven expert, with us, and we really appreciate you getting up so early to join us and present on staging memory in new devices and repertoires in post-colonial neoliberal Peru. Maria Eugenia, before we start, we could do it otherwise than in the technical rehearsal. We could do it that we show your presentation here and you only say next or next slide, please, which means we will have you on the video screen and can see your presentation. If you share your presentation with Zoom, we cannot see the video of you. But it's your presentation. You can decide how you would like to have it.
Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you for the nice presentation, Hinnerk, and I apologize for not being with you in Germany. Today is my daughter's 16th birthday, and I actually have to be with her. I'm very sorry. I sent a PPT presentation, but actually it had some mistakes. Like for example, there's a word that it's expresión, and then actually it was it got in Spanish, and then I had to change it to English. So I mean,
we could live with this. We could live with this to have you and the presentation.
With my mistakes. Okay.
Okay, then we go with the
great.
presentation here and with you on the screen. Thank you so much.
Great.
Well, the floor is yours. I show you the 5 minutes warning sign 5 minutes before the end of half an hour.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So then we begin. Yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation. I will actually talk about something that it has been in my mind for a long time, and it's the discussion about not who are the perpetrators, but I mean, how do they become visible, and the different repertoires that have been used, especially in the last decade, I guess, in Peru, to show and to as visible marks of who are these perpetrators. And I organized the presentation in 3 parts. The first part, I will actually provide some context about the discussion around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Peru. And because I think that one of my arguments is how transitional justice procedures tend to construct political subjectivities of a certain kind, especially making victims look apolitical. And that actually makes very difficult to get clear information about the perpetrators or profiles or faces or the perpetrators. So, in the second part, I will show where the perpetrators are appearing, like in literature and in cinema. And finally, I will actually close making reference to these political justice or transitional justice procedures and what they make to actually construct these kinds of political subjectivities. So I hope it all goes okay. So next image. Yes, the Peruvian Truth and Reconciliation Commission worked in Peru between 1980 and the year 2000. Peru had an armed struggle between 1980 and the year 2000. It was an armed struggle and also a period of political authoritarianism with the Fujimori regime. And there are 3 things that I actually think are very important to say about the research done by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The first one is how it makes visible that the fight or the struggle took part in different Andean and Amazonian communities. And the way the violence actually put these communities into, make them visible for the national and the state. So this is a quote from Primitivo Quispe from Ajomarca, which is an Andean community in Ayacucho, in one of the public hearings that took place during the preparation for the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And in this quote, he's actually pointing to the fact that he felt that his town didn't exist before violence. And the second issue that I think it's very important to say is that between 1980, when the Shining Path declared its armed struggle to take control of the Peruvian state, it actually eroded and increased violence. Violence became massive, but actually it was selective because it occurred especially in certain areas in Peru, mainly in Ayacucho region, mainly in the Selva Central, which is like the central part of the Amazon in Peru, where are most of the disappeared and victims of violence. And the third issue is that actually between 1980 and the year 2000, violence wasn't the same for everybody. It had different peaks of violence and different cycles of violence. For instance, in Ayacucho between 1982, when the army entered, actually it was between 1982 and 1985, there is a peak of disappearances, which coincides with the army in Ayacucho. And then it came down. And it is around 1992 when we have violence in the city, especially in the city of Lima. So there are these cycles and dynamics of violence too that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission actually mark, and I think are very important to say. Next, please. Also, I wanted to say that the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission estimates around 70,000 people who died. But I mean, since the end of the Truth Commission in the year 2003, we have had the creation of the program of reparations in Peru. And the program of reparations actually states that there are more than 200,000 people actually victims of the violence. Because one person is actually has parents, have daughters, or have brothers and sisters. So violence actually, the universe of those who suffer from violence increased enormously. And since the year 2018, in Peru, there is a directorate for searching for the disappeared. And this directorate for the disappeared estimates that there are more than 21,000 disappeared in Peru. And here in this map, you can also see what I was telling you about these years where more violence occurred, like these cycles of violence, and also the places of violence. So you can see that it was massive in certain places, but not in all around Peru. The next one, please. Yes, so one of the things that one of the main conclusions of the final report is that social exclusion and poverty actually mark violence and mark who the victims of violence were the most, no? Especially those who speak different language than Spanish, mainly Quechua speaking persons or Ashanica speaking persons. Those were the most actually who suffered from violence. The next one, please. Yeah. In the final report, there are also one section that there's one chapter dedicated to who were the armed groups. And the armed groups, it's divided between the subversive groups, where is the Shining Path and the Movimiento Revolucionario Tupac Amaru. There are also the paramilitary groups, Grupo o Comando Colina, Comando Rodrigo Franco, and also it shows and pointed to the to the Peruvian armed forces. No? However, the Shining Path is identified as the major perpetrator for instigated and beginning violence in 1980, and also for being responsible for 54% of all the cases of violence. During the years of especially between 1980 and 1990, that decade of the 80s actually, there were almost no images of who was Abimael Guzman, who was the leader of the Shining Path. I did some photographs at the Dircotes Museum, which is actually not a museum, but it's where the confiscated pieces of art of the Shining Path are actually kept. It's a police, like the police investigation section. And there is this image of Abimael Guzman holding a book, like a red book, like Mao, and holding the red flag also, like and guiding the revolution. And you can see the faces of who these masses, because that's the way that Abimael Guzman called people, were, no? And most of them look with hats and dark skinned faces, and there is only one small one here that has this sort of Amazonian, hat on his head, no? But Abimael Guzman was a philosophy professor at the Universidad Nacional San Cristóbal de Huamanga in Ayacucho. When he decided to get underground in 1968, and then he started actually more of a very clandestine life. So there was little information about who he was when violence started. So there were lots of rumors, and imaginary about who this man was. No, the man with 1,000 ears, the man who can know everything what was happening, and the man with a very, harsh discipline and reactions. No, and the next image, please. I wanted actually to discuss about who Guzman was, because Guzman, in a way, was a university professor of philosophy. He wrote his thesis about Kant, for instance, no? And he wasn't like in Hannah Arendt discussion about the banality of the evil. He wasn't a bureaucrat, or he wasn't a regular man. He was like a mastermind of organizing the Shining Path, and also of leading the revolution and leading the different periods of the armed struggle in Peru. And the discussion about Guzman and Guzman involvement in all of them actually wasn't very clear in a way that his image and his representation was unknown for most of the group. During the 1980s and 1990s, the only image of Guzman that circulated was when he was captured in Huancayo with his wife, or his first wife, and actually it was when he was a very young man. You know? The next image, please. But something happened, and that's like also when we talk about transitional justice, or the implementation of transitional justice measures, like a truth commission, for instance, or a program of reparations. These measures also indicate that the way memory publicly will be spoken also differ during time. During the period of the Truth Commission, there was this memory boom, basically, that you can see in arts, especially in retablos and tablas de Sarwa in Ayacucho, in many songs, huaynos and different songs in carnivals, also in Ayacucho, in oral history among the Ashaninkas too. There was little actually in cinema, there was little in literature, but then it was in the next decade, since 2010 onwards, that we began to see a lot of different writings, especially in literature, autobiographical writings of, declaring participations in the armed struggle, declaring about being a member of the Shining Path, no? And one of these books that is actually a bestseller book in Peru, and now it's going to be a Hollywood film coming soon, is Memorias de un Soldado Desconocido by Lurgio Gavilán. No? Lurgio Gavilán, who is now an anthropologist, is our colleague in anthropology, when he had the age of 12, he decided to follow the path of his brother, who entered the militia of the Shining Path. And then he stayed with the Shining Path until he had some around 13, 14 years old. And then he was captured by the armed forces. He entered the army. Actually, the man on the, covered like sort of Comandante Marcos, that it's the book about Shogun. He is the mayor who saved his life. And he is actually the one with whom he entered to school, and he stayed in the army until he finishes school. And then he decided to get into with Franciscan priests, and to become sort of part of the church. So he left the church with a manuscript, an autobiographical manuscript about all the years, around in between the Shining Path, the army, and then the church, no? And then he decided to become an anthropologist. So his book, actually, when it appeared in 2012, it was like a big shock. For the first time, we can see someone speaking in public about being involved in the Shining Path, no? And also someone speaking in public and not actually looking as all the representations of Guzman, not really wearing a red flag, not wearing also, or not with all the rumors about having the 1,000 ears to listen to everything or knowing everything. No, he was just a man from a rural village in Ayacucho, in northern part of Ayacucho, who's searching for his brother, had to get into the Shining Path to get to know what his brother was doing there, no? And in the centerpiece, in this image, this is one of the interviews that he got in the main newspaper in Peru. And in which he states that he didn't have the chance to choose what life he wanted to live, but that he was given basically just to live this life. No, he didn't have the opportunity or didn't have that chance to look for something different. No, so that's the way he presents his involvement in the Shining Path. The next image, please. Soon after Lurgio Gavilan's book, José Carlos Agüero wrote another book that is called Los Rendidos, El Acto de Perdonar, which is also a very best-selling book in Peru and has been translated to English, to Japanese, and to different languages now. Duke University Press just published it last year as The Surrender. José Carlos Agüero is an historian from the Universidad Nacional de San Marcos. He's also a human rights activist, and for the first time, he came out in 2013 to talk about his parents. Both were his mother and his father were part of the Shining Path. His father was killed in El Frontón, which was a prison in an island near the coast of El Callao in Peru, and it was bombed in 1986. And there his father died. And his mother died, actually, his mother was kidnapped and appeared with a gunshot on her head on a beach in Lima in 1992. And for the first time, he spoke about, also in public, about his parents and about being a son or the son of two Shining Path members, no, and having to say that there was no place for him in society because as the son of two Shining Path members, he felt that for the rest of his life, he has to ask for pardon, no? That he has to surrender, basically. no? That he has to claim this pardon because he didn't know what his parents did when they were alive, no? Even though he claimed that that it's amazing the way, it's amazing the way, that the little information about his parents that he had, and also the little information about Shining Path members that society share in common, no? And the next image, please. Yeah, but this is why I actually choose Lurgio Gavilán and José Carlos Agüero. Since they public, their books, they have become like memory rock stars, if we can say, in Peru. And there are several documentaries produced, fiction films produced in which they both appear, no? And when talking to José Carlos Agüero recently, he claimed that there are some moments in which he felt very uncomfortable in this mass production of films around violence in Peru. And especially he talked about this film called La Búsqueda, or The Search, which was also in the Lima Film Festival and Lhasa Film Festival. It was directed by Mariano Agudo and Daniel Lagares in 2019. And he told that he felt very uncomfortable because he was taken to the El Frontón prison in El Callao, where his father was killed. And there he got the interview, no? And he felt that interview was very shocking for him, to speak where his father died, and also to be recreating almost the scene of his father's death, no? And cinema has appeared as a sort of a technology and technique for the emergence of these kinds of memories, and also for the representation of perpetrator characters. And one of the things that I have been thinking a lot in recent years is how the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Peru. One of the main contributions to Truth and Reconciliation Commissions around the world was public hearings, copied mostly from the South African experience. In Peru, we implemented public hearings for basically to share testimonies. And testimonies are fair-handed given, and basically it's like the idea of the I, or the plural I, no? And the evidence based of being or having been during the act of violence, no? And one of the things is that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission gathered almost 1,700,000 testimonies. But it always had to prove as evidence that violence occurred, especially against the conservative grounds in Peru that negates violence and negates their participation in violence. And one of the, we can say, like Taussig interstices, where the faces of the perpetrators have begun to appear, is in films. And I think, and that's my argument, is because of the use of fiction. It's because of the impression that in films, the object of desire, of the object of representation, doesn't exist, or exists as long as the length of the film. So it exists only in the hour and 14 minutes of the film, and the story stays there. So there is sort of a distancing from the story and a distancing from the character that is depicted, and from the historical moment that is also recreated. And the next image, please. And in the Búsqueda, there is something very interesting that happens. And it happens in minute 59. And it's actually when Lurgio Gavilan goes to police station to submit actually a search for his dead brother, or the disappearance of his brother. And in this dialogue that I actually translated from the film, he is with this is where he's registering, the prosecutor registering the story, and here is the secretary. And the officer asked him twice about his brother participation in the Shining Path. No, how did you take part of the Shining Path, and also about his brother participation, and also about his.
I mean, we just come away by you. Do you know how loud you are?
And his brother participation, and also about and you can see about the how he took part of the Shining Path, and also how he stays, he's looking for his brother, and then the officer ended up saying that please keep that on record, because what is going to happen is that they are not going to look for him. No. So next, please. So I've been researching a lot about transitional justice procedures and the emergence of political subjectivities. One of the things about truth commissions is the way they depicted, a very dichotomized or polar this differentiation.
Sorry, but it's not a workplace, really.
Happy birthday to your daughter, I'd say. I hope you saw the 5 minutes warning sign.
See.
Okay.
No,
good.
It's because I'm here at the hotel lounge, and there's this woman that appears. I'm very sorry. I'm just here at the hotel lounge because we are in a different place than my house. So I just wanted to finish saying that how truth commissions tend to build this dichotomy between victims and perpetrators, and construct this idea, especially the Truth Commission in Peru, construct this idea of the pure, clean victim, depoliticized. And also when you get to see the program of reparations in Peru in Article 4, you will find how perpetrators are not part actually of the program, how they are neglected of being even beneficiaries of the program of reparations in Peru. And yes, and that's what I wanted to say. And the next image is about the discussion that I wanted to open about the production of different kinds of films. We are having a research project with Mauricio Godoy and Sara Lucia Guerrero about these diverse voices that appear in cinema and in audiovisual productions. No, and you can see how they have been increased since the years of the Truth Commission. And the last one is just to say thank you. I'm sorry for this guest that appear here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria Eugenia, for this dense, very interesting paper you presented under those circumstances there, with the audience behind you and in front of you. I hope you heard the applause on the microphone. Yeah, so we are really happy to have you here, Gabriela. Also, I'm very sure we have 25 minutes now for questions and the first round of discussions. I'm very sure there's a lot of questions to those papers that dealt with the not only visual representation of violence, but also with the how to deal with violence, dealing with violence visually in a visual way. Issues that raised both papers, and I'm looking for arms going up. Okay, there's a first question in the middle of the third last row. We have a microphone here, Maria Eugenia, so that you can hear the question from the audience also.
Thank you for these very interesting talks. I have a question for Maria Eugenia. You said that fiction is being used to give the perpetrator a face in Peru, and then in the end you talked about the victims and transitional justice, which are supposed to be clear and apolitical. And I was wondering if fiction is also being used to show these kind of more complex victims that might be perpetrators as well, or might be tainted for having the wrong political ideas or something like that. Maybe you could elaborate on that. Thank you.
Okay, there's another question. I suggest we collect 2 questions at least, so that you have a little bit more time to think about it. Here's a question by Christina Hatzky in the first row, in the third row, the second row.
Thank you very much, Maria Eugenia y Gabriela. I think my question is for Gabriela, but I think probably also Maria Eugenia can answer. It came to my mind about repercussions and appropriations of violence, and in the presentation of Gabriela, I was about violence in Mexico and narco violence in Mexico. It came to my mind that a popular figure of violence has appeared in the last 15 years, La Santa Muerte, the saint of death. It's a skeleton that takes up a popular culture in Mexico of death, of the how is she called, the La Catrina. But Santa Muerte is something else, and it is dealing with violence. But because I felt that this figure, and she's popping up, I can see her everywhere, and she has to do much with this violence. And I was asking myself whether in Peru there are also other popular form of appropriation and dealing with violence. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to start? Okay. Maria Eugenia, would you like to start?
Yes, I can start. Yes, I wanted to say that thank you for the questions. Yes, I think that actually cinema, literature, and the different repertoires allow for the emergence of these gray zones of victims not being so clean or apolitical or depoliticized as the program of reparations or other instances would like. So you can find the figures of Lurgio Gavilán, or you can find the figures of José Carlos Agüero, and you can find for example, the son of an MRTA leader looking for his father, going to the prison to searching for his father. So you can find these stories of children of guerrilla and subversive group members, of relatives searching for brothers. So there is a large number of these depictions of violence that have become to appear, and that actually discussed with these ideas by the transitional justice procedures that have to tend to look in a very separate way between victims and perpetrators. And yes, there are many different popular forms of dealing with violence. When I did my PhD I work with representations of memory in retablos, for example, which are artworks in which artists from Ayacucho began to depict violence. And there are popular songs, different art representations in Peru, actually. Photographies too. Yes, thank you.
Hello? Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, La Santa Muerte, I feel I'm not the good person to answer about this because I have a very close friend of mine and colleague at El Colegio de Michoacán who works on La Santa Muerte in Tepito. She has done a long research on her and her guardian, who is a woman who basically listens to people who come, who need to speak, no? And that's a way of healing. So I think there is a lot of that. Spaces people open through religion or through other means in order to speak about their losses, to build specific marks on the public space to speak about their losses as well. And what I've been working on more closely is with local photographers, both in Zamora and in the indigenous rural areas around, and just looking at these very ordinary photographic practices. And I found that they have ways of dealing with violence, like of reconstructing families, putting families together, of dealing with losses in the way they interact with their clients. You know, for example, there is this family who arrives to the studio and asks for a family picture, but two of the sons are in the United States. They have migrated, or somebody else has been dead. And what photographs do is that they put the family, they stick together the whole members of the family as if they were united. No? So I think there is a lot of playful forms of reparation in these ordinary photographic practices, in which through the fictional possibilities, the fictional artifices of photographic studio, they help to repair those losses because of violence and migration. So I've been looking at those kind of practices, and also how in organizing photographic exhibits with local photographers, I try to look at what they emphasize, what they underline in their pictures, in their narratives, in their curation of images, in order to present more or less a coherent idea of a united community, while meanwhile the community is really hit and really disintegrated because of violence. So that's the kind of forms I've been looking at, the way people are dealing with violence through photographic practices on this daily basis. And so.
Thank you. Okay, I see a further question by Carolina, and in the last row, or second last row.
Thank you very much for both of the presentations. They were really interesting. I wanted to ask, I have a question for each one. To Gabriela Zamorano, I wanted to ask more about like the counter narratives, or how these local initiatives deal with this publicity depictions of the narcos, like how in the mainstream media. If you could please develop more on how does the histories and counter histories, or the discussion happened like in the level of the image, and how does that discussion influence national, regional, or regional imaginaries for political actions. And in the same vein, I wanted to ask Maria Eugenia about popular uses of images, and how does she see who are the ones that have the media in the post-conflict, and now that this is very interesting to me to think about the transitional justice process that ended, like the commission ended 22 years ago. So there has been some time to see what is happening in terms of the image and how it is used and how it is with or against, or how does it work, the image production in relation to the Truth Commission report. And I am thinking in Colombia that a month ago, less than a month ago, delivered like the final Truth Commission report. Thank you very much for the presentation. And this is also, to emphasize if the national imaginaries have changed, or who are the actors that are participating in that discussion. Thank you.
We have a second question for you.
Thank you so much to both Gabriela and Maria Eugenia for the presentations. My question is for both of you, but it sprang from a comment that Gabriela made in her presentation. You used images of perpetrators of violence, and you made a comment that was sort of like dichotomous about the meaning that that these images have for the state and for the general public. So you mentioned that for the state, the images were sort of like a meaning that we are doing our job. We are like, on top of it, we are trying to deal with this. But then for the general public, the images meant more about the insecurity, the ambiguity, right? The violence is creating. And it just made me think about how difficult it is to understand how people make meaning out of these images. Because you can argue, right, that there is a meaning and an interpretation of these images for pretty much every person that sees these images. So I just wanted to ask you if both of you can talk a little bit about how you're dealing with this problem methodologically of dealing with how these images are interpreted by so many people who see them because they are so public. Because I think it's at the heart of what we are doing when we're trying to study images, how to unravel how much meaning they can be made of.
Well, thank you for those very interesting questions. I will start answering the last one. In terms of methodology, how to deal with this really polysemic and ambiguous quality of images. Actually, that's one of the things that keeps me stuck to studying images. And the field that I have studied is the uses of digital media. So I try to track how the circulation of an image in posters like some of the ones I showed, how it circulates and gets reposted, and how what are the comments. And what I wrote and published in a preliminary work on this, in a previous work on this, is I found that this whole field of social media, digital social media, especially Facebook, works as a space in which citizens can perform some kind of citizenship because they know that in formal public sphere spaces they have no voice. So this is a place where they can really throw their opinions, sometimes very visceral, and say what they think about the state and say what they think about criminals, but in very visceral and sensorial ways, no? And they debate actually about, that's where they continuously express their mistrust and their suspicion against the state. And my methodology here is, more than trying to understand how images work as evidence, try to follow how this ambiguous quality of images and the suspicion they raise is actually a very productive way to understand all these different responses to them. Very visceral, very sensorial in a way as well. No? So that's the way I've been trying to look at this space as a space that is opened for a wider. I even mentioned the idea of counter publics in which they can express a form of citizenship or opinion that is impossible to express in a more formal public democratic sphere. So, and in terms of counter-narratives, how local initiatives deal with this kind of publicity, that's a very complex issue too, because on the one hand, you can see children and whole families, like very into the narco aesthetics, listening to narco corridos and wearing accessories of arms, and children really aware of what kind of weapons exist and what kind of cars exist. And on the other hand, those are the same people who are really hit by violence and very directly hit by violence. And I was really thinking about what McKenna was saying about this fictional terrain in which you can relate to all those objects related to the narco, and even a student of mine is working on narco movies produced in the border region. And it's not that people are narcos because they consume those kind of cultural production, but there is a way of relating to a particular aesthetic that can even be regional, and at the same time, doing other things in order to reject that same violence in which they live in. So that's a very complex question, and I've been trying to look at the space of digital media, because that's really where those images circulate and where people kind of debate, in very direct ways about their suspicion about the state. Basically, their lack of trust on the state and on the justice system. So this is more or less what.
Thank you, Maria Eugenia.
Yes, thank you for the questions. Let me see. Well, yes, one thing I can say is that since the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, things have changed. I mean, in the production of images, in the understanding of what occurred in Peru, in actually the construction of memories, but always in tension and in conflict perspectives, no? Between, the conservative groups, the armed forces, and general public opinion. No? In general public opinion, there is a very polysemic, multifaceted way of perceiving violence and of actually perceiving or talking about the perpetrators. No, and one of these, I don't know if one of the things that I wanted to do is because since the early days of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there was this insistence on denouncing and depicting perpetrators as terroristas, and the turn into a verb terruqueo, which is like a way of denigrating the other. And this terruqueo has increased in later years, especially last year during the presidential elections in Peru. And the terruqueo produces a discussion about the terrorists, who these terrorists are. And when you are accused of terruqueo, then you are accused of being a terrorist. And that is something that has changed in recent years, especially because of the political tensions between conservative and progressive groups in Peru, no? And that's more of a political discussion, I think, no? And that creates a lot of tension about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the Memory Museum, for example, no? Yes, like Gabriela just mentioned, what I like about images is the way images, how they are put in circulation and how their significances change over time. I mean, it's not only that they are polysemic, but the meanings and the way people interpret, appropriate images also change in time. And also it change in relation to the political context, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there further questions from the audience? There's a question there to the left side. My left side, your right side.
Thank you for the presentations. I thought that was very interesting, and I was wondering, with regard to Gabriela Zamorano's presentation, it seems like there are a lot of very, very ambivalent portrayals of the criminals and the crime, and you were talking in the beginning a lot about the atmosphere of violence and that it's like all around and everywhere, and I was wondering in how far these very ambivalent depictions increase this atmosphere of violence or decrease, because you just said that the possibility to participate online in discourse about these depictions creates a form of citizenship and participation. But it seems to me like these very, very ambivalent portrayals must also create new forms of insecurity and unsureness about who they're dealing with in these violent conflicts. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry. No. Okay. So, yeah, I feel there is a very strong tension between the sense of not knowing who these people are, and at the same time, people are continuously speculating and trying to and even telling you rumors that people exactly know who it, like the ex-governor is the owner of this and this and these places, and he, saying names, specific names, like a public secret, and they affirm those kind of accusations about specific people, public characters in the town, in the city, and at the same time there is always this hidden threat that. And that's, I think that's one of the one of the aspects that makes this organized crime very effective, because they manage to maintain some kind of anonymity, but they manage to make it clear of who they are, no? And I think we don't pay much attention to those kind of images because they are like. My project at this point, my general project, is looking at those very subtle images that are present like everywhere and that people look at continuously in their cell phones and just like very vulgar or ordinary images that we don't pay much attention to because we like to talk about, I don't know, Netflix or about very, very like public or solid images, and I think in those little images there is a lot of leaking, a lot of events, that are reflected and circulated and socialized on a daily basis, on a very, very, very like in the very raw ways of daily life. So I get very interested on how those images of people, who participate in criminal activities, they just make themselves some selfies, and suddenly those cell phones fall in the hands of autodefensa groups, and they try to get together with the police in order to find those criminals by showing their faces. And I always wonder if those mugshots, or not mugshots, but those searched images Are they really effective? Do people really look at or could recognize somebody in the street and say, this person did this? And on the other hand, there are a lot of people who know who they are. They are their neighbors or their family members or their whatever, but they will never point at them, you know. So I think images do a lot in terms of this ambivalence and looking at those very subtle shifts and daily uses can help us make questions about and can help us realize how ideas of crime and imaginaries about who the criminals are can become very concrete and yeah.
Thank you, Gabriela, and thank you, Maria Eugenia. Time is already up. If there's no further questions, it's just up to me to thank you both again for being here. Asking you whether you wanted to add something, Maria Eugenia.
No, I just want to say thank you, and I think just to add something to Gabriela's comment about how these images become sort of near to us, but also they create a sense of distance in a way. They objectify the person depicted in the image.
Yeah.
I mean, there is also a process of objectification that makes, that creates the sense that the story of violence or the event of violence didn't occur to you, didn't touch you. And I think that's also something that happens. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I apologize for not being there, and I also apologize for the guest in the hotel where we are. Sorry.
I just wanted to add a little thing on what McKenna said. I think what I tried to communicate also in talking about this atmosphere of violence is that those news that get that become publicized in the media, in local media, in Zamora, since it's a very small city, you will right away know that the person killed or whatever, you know, is somebody known to somebody close to you. I mean, it feels really close. And when these news become national news, it's like those children, you know. There is a kind of a thing of distance and being just there embedded, and that is also in relation to how people consume and relate to those images. So those children who appear there is that you can almost feel those children who were caught, who were involved in this cartel, were just there, you know, like they are very close, and you know that there are more children involved in that. And this news that of the vans crossing the city, you could hear the shots. So there is something, it's not something that happened far away, but something that eventually relates to you and that is within the same space. And that's something very strong. And it's not, we could also analyze not only the visual markers of this violence, but also the smells, the sounds, you know, there is all this sensorial thing that really indicates that it's there. It's really there where you are, no?
Thank you. This is only the first half of our panel. After a coffee break, we will continue and have further aspects to be presented and discussed concerning the visual representations of violence. What struck me in this first round was the mentioning of rock stars of memory culture by Maria Eugenia compared to the rock stars of violence in Mexico, thinking of not only the images you showed us, but also the narco rap and narco corrido, a whole cultural phenomenon glorifying those violent actors and catching like Hollywood stars like Sean Penn driving them to do interviews with gangsters, and this is this is what struck me. I'm very excited of looking forward to the next round after a coffee break. At 4 p.m. we continue with the presentation of Alicia Decker and a conversation with Freddie Simba by Anya. The conversation between Anya and Freddie will be in French, so please have in mind to grab a translator thing when you re-enter at 4.